All right, we got the numbers here. So earnings per share coming out at 27 cents. That's below the 43 cents that had been estimated. Our revenue coming in at $19.34 billion. The average analyst estimate was for $21.37 billion. So missing pretty significantly, especially on the earnings front. And some of the other things that we're seeing here initially here, some comments that the tariff landscape will have a larger impact on the energy unit, that the company is going to revisit its 2025 guidance in their second quarter update. That is not particularly unusual right now in terms of what we're hearing from companies. Tesla says it's difficult to measure the impacts of global trade policy, but that things will stabilize in the medium to long term. The company also says that its plans for new vehicles is on track to start production in the first half of 2025. So still on track for that, we'll see. And that there is sufficient liquidity to fund the product roadmap, but the uncertainty could affect demand in the near term here. And it looks like there is not a return to growth forecast in this earnings report. So we'll see what kind of color commentary we get on the conference call related to that.
Yeah, and going along with some of that tariff comments here, Julie, going just through the presentation here, company talking about automotive energy markets continue, uncertainty continues to increase as a rapidly evolving trade policy adversely impacts global supply chain, cost structure of Tesla and our peers. This dynamic, along with changing political sentiment, interesting for them to call that out within the statement, within their presentation itself, could have a meaningful impact on demand for our products in the near term. So pretty forthright commentary from the company here around the challenges facing the business. Now, I know I just gave a preamble about how the story is really about what Elon says and buying his worldview, and the company has generally viewed commentary to this effect, I would say, as, again, very Wall Street, very numbers, you're not seeing the big picture. But I think for Tesla to come out and be pretty forthright about the challenges facing the business at this point in time, and you look at a miss of the magnitude we're looking at, a change in tone, I guess I would say, is a different sort of release, I think, from the company than you are typically want to see if you go back to the quarters.
The changing political sentiment really does pop out, right? Because when you think about sales not being as strong to start the year, right? Of course, disappointing, and really just a large part of that story, as we were highlighting a minute ago, we know that people are not that excited about Elon Musk's involvement in the new administration to the point that he's been involved. We've ran several survey data, right? We've been covering this for the past couple months of people just saying that they're less interested in buying Teslas. So then I think my question is sort of spinning it forward, because we keep on saying how it's really kind of all about the call with Elon. To what extent is he willing to talk about this, to maybe address any level of what does changing political sentiment actually mean? Are they aware of sort of how consumers are now changing their views on the company, and is that part of their actual calculus moving forward, and something he's sort of considering amid all of this?
Yeah, and it also highlights, once again, the bizarre position of the world's richest man and head of one of the world's biggest companies being in this position in an administration with which he is at odds regarding trade policy. Clearly, everything that is in this report indicates that trade policy is not good for a company like Tesla, even though Elon has talked in the past, yes, they assemble or build their cars in the United States, but he is, he's at loggerheads with Peter Navarro, the trade advisor to the president on this issue. And again, it highlights the perils of being in the private sector and yet being so close to the political realm, not just for the actual political ramifications, but if what the administration is doing is against your shareholders' interests.
It's a challenging position, because what Tesla said in the release is materially the same as what most companies are going to say versions of in their release. But to your point, Julie, most companies do not have their chief executive, in the Oval Office many days.
Yeah, so exactly.
That's a big difference there. Also, the stock's doing nothing, which is fascinating to me. I'm sitting here looking at the stock like, what are we doing? I guess we're going to wait for the call. Down 1%.
Maybe people are waiting for the call?
I suppose is fine.
It seemed like coming into the report,
pricing an 8% move, something like this?
Yeah, but didn't most people coming into the report think that the
Stock's
report
down
was
40% this year?
Yeah, no one really thought the report was going to be that good anyway, right?
Sure.
So you get a not good report, and kind of what do you do with these numbers again until you hear, I think, some larger questions that people want to know from us in the call?
there was a lot of commentary going into this that this would be a sort of reset year for Tesla. That it's not that the first quarter doesn't matter, in the words of Adam Jonas of Morgan Stanley, but it is more that you now have to sort of reset and look past this and see what happens next. We've been talking a lot today about what we're going to hear from Musk on the call in terms of his role at the company. You have said very firmly, like, DOGE needs to go in terms of his focus. He needs to come back. Do you think we're going to get that today, Ross?
I do. I do think we're going to get that. And I think we're going to get that also because his special government employee designation ends anyways at the end of May. So it's not like this is new information. I think he's just going to make it very clear. He's going to try to do anything to get the stock not to go lower. So he's going to say he's coming back to Tesla and he's going to be done with DOGE and he's done his work and he's solved all these problems and now, I'll be back. And that's, I think, the message that people want to hear. And that is probably the only thing that could get the stock moving higher. So I expect to hear that.
Ross, as you look at the stock slide over the last few months now, 40% drop, we've had multiple periods like this in Tesla's history. How do you think this period, is it analogous in any way, I suppose, to prior drops? And how have you thought about the story as we get towards what feels like a pivot point in where it's been over the last 6 months?
People aren't going to like this statement, but Tesla is fundamentally a different story than where it was several years ago. I mean, Tesla was a massive growth story. It was a young, amazingly innovative technology company building cars and software. And now Tesla is a very mature EV maker with a CEO who doesn't work there, who says horrible things about lots of people that won't buy their cars anymore. And the biggest issue Tesla has is people just don't want their products, even though they're the best products in the market. So I don't know how they solve this. So I think Tesla's best days are behind it at this point. And until something really changes in the direction and or leadership at the company, especially with the board of directors, to try to get the company back on track, I see sales continuing to decline. And with that, revenues, profits, and everything else. So energy storage can only save you so much, which it did save them in the quarter because that's been a very strong part of the business. But automotive sales were just dismal.
What about all the other stuff, Ross? All the other reasons that people own this stock, right? The cheaper car that is supposed to be in production by the end of the first quarter, the robo-taxi, eventually the humanoid robots, the AI piece of it all. Is all of that enough at this point?
Well, when you're an investor, you look at the future and you have to try to model out what that future looks like economically. And so obviously a lower priced car was the most sensible thing that Tesla could have built. And then they didn't build it. And now I don't know what's happening with this, but I don't think there's a lower priced car. So let's just move on from that. A lower priced car is actually just a used Tesla, which you can buy for $20,000 or so online right now. So if you want a low priced Tesla, it's called a Model Y. Just go buy one. They're all online, used. They're great cars at a ridiculously cheap price. Then you have another problem because then there's so many used Teslas for sale, they have no reason to buy a new Tesla except it has a light bar on it. The light bar on the Model Y and the new Model Y is very nice, but is it really going to convince a whole new legions of buyers when they don't even advertise? No. So then you've got robots and the future of cybercab. And the cybercab business is not a business I want to be in because I think it took Uber forever to make money. And now you've got Waymo's, and I'm in an area where Waymo is very active and I watch Waymo's drive incredibly well every day while my full self-driving still is this clunky, software driving like a 12-year-old. And so I'm really upset that the software doesn't work and it's not even comparable to Waymo. So Waymo's expanding in all over the world now, and I just don't see how Tesla catches them. And Waymo's got money. And then lastly, I just don't see a world anytime soon where we have robots walking around and doing our laundry and stuff. So if you can tell me when that's going to happen, that's how long it's going to be till Tesla makes money. Well, that could be 5 or 10 years from now. So I don't know about you, but I got to make clients money every year. And Tesla just doesn't seem to be doing what it needs to be doing.
Ross, you raised an interesting point about the cost of the car, because I know a lot of people who have been in like that, let's call it like that Audi, BMW sort of market, and they get a Tesla because it's a whole lot cheaper than those kinds of cars. But I think for a lot of people, it's sort of associated as like a luxury vehicle. Now, the company's been very forthright. They wanted lower cost cars. They make lower cost cars. You can get lower cost Teslas. And I'm just wondering if there's like a timeline here upon which the strategy starts to look more at premiumizing the brand rather than this mass appeal, mass robo-taxi networks, all those sort of things that have defined the company in the last, I don't know what it is, 4, 5, 6 years.
You know, I would argue that Tesla was a premium brand when it started, and it's, you know, and I was worried about this many years ago, it looking a lot more like Toyota in the future than Mercedes and BMW. And that's what's happened, is it looks a lot more like Toyota now, and people don't consider Tesla a premium brand anymore. And so, you know, the mass appeal brand works if everybody likes your brand, but if everybody hates your brand because your CEO supports like right-wing Nazi parties in Europe, it's really, really hard to sell cars. And so when you want to have mass appeal, I highly recommend that you act in a way that appeals to the masses. And so I'm not sure what Tesla is anymore. It's certainly not a premium brand anymore. I wouldn't consider it a mass brand because most people actually hate Tesla now. It's probably one of the most hated brands that I've ever seen, and it sucks. It's really sad that Elon's allowed this to happen to the company. So I'm not sure what they do with their brand moving forward, and I don't think they can be a premium brand, and nor are they focused on the premium market. If you look at a Rivian or a new Mercedes or BMW EV, they're so much nicer than Teslas.
Ross, every time we talk, we ask you if you still have the stock, either yourself or on behalf of clients. And it feels like you hold your nose and you just hold on to it.
Well, it's more the opposite. You know, we acquired a lot of stock in the old days. You know, we've owned it for 11 years and we've made a ton of money off of it. And for the last almost 3 years, we've been selling the stock. But it's really hard to sell, you know, $100+ million worth of stock, you know, easily, and there's a tax consequence that we've had to accept with that. And so I had a lot more hope than I have now that Tesla would right the ship, but now I think it's real tough, and you know, for them to fix the ship now. And so long term, I still think Tesla has the best products. I think climate change is the most important issue that humans solve over the next 10 years. Tesla makes the best like EVs, the best software for EVs. It makes energy storage products, the best charging experience. And if they focused on this, they could be wildly successful. The EV market in the United States growing 10% or more. EV market globally probably growing 25%. This is a great business. Like there's nothing wrong with it. So I have in this hope that either a new CEO takes over and fixes the brand, or Elon somehow changes or something, but my hope is running thin. And so, you know, we end up selling the stock every week. You know, we'll sell stock for clients depending on each client's situation. For many of our clients, they don't want to own Tesla anymore. So our position is about 40% of what it used to be, and we continue to whittle it down. But many people, our clients, very much care about climate in the future, and Tesla's still the best solution.
You know, Ross, you talked about that possible executive change, I guess. Get a new CEO. Is there like, I know Elon, you know, has the comp package and has his control of the board and all that. Is there any scope on which a serious activist push could be made with someone who has enough capital in the stock that you could get movement? And I can see you kind of shaking your head here.
No, you know, I kind of tried that in 2023 when I ran for the board, and I did get a lot of institutional support at that time. And one of the things I realized is there's no way that Elon's letting anybody on this board that isn't on his team. And everybody on the board is more than bought and paid for by Elon. And I realized what a mess I was getting into. So that's why I pulled out, because I just didn't want to be involved anymore, because the politics around that board is pretty bad. And so, you know, the fact of the matter is that, you know, right now, unless the board of directors is sacked, like nothing's going to change at Tesla, and that's what needs to be done. And I think the attorney general, like in California, should be suing the board of directors of Tesla for negligence. And that's, I think, the next step for many of these institutional shareholders and pensions, for the damage that's been done to the pensioners from a lack of board oversight and violation of NASDAQ rules. So I think, you know, the board needs to be replaced immediately. It's probably the worst board in the history of American business.
Wow, that's saying something, Ross. All right, well, as always, it's good to catch up with you. We appreciate you chatting with us about Tesla. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Jessica, we have been talking remarkably little about Tesla's core business during this discussion because we've been so focused on DOGE, we've been so focused on the robot comments, et cetera. But Tesla's core business, in a word, is bad right now. And is there anything that you saw in the report today or that you were starting to hear on the call that gives you encouragement that things are going to get better?
I mean, not necessarily. We haven't seen a lot of metrics. Obviously, when their delivery numbers came out for the first quarter, they were underwhelming. And I don't think it was necessarily a surprise that they were underwhelming, but it doesn't really bode well for the rest of the year, considering in terms of actual product, there's not really a lot out there. Are they going to have this lower price vehicle? What exactly is it? Is it going to be a decontented Model Y that maybe people won't find as appealing? That's like a big liability right there. So when you think about Tesla, their core business is selling vehicles. And right now, that's probably the basic that they need to get back to at this point in time.
Jessica, something I'm really curious about that I still don't feel we have a good answer to is we know that Tesla's sales dropped. We know that there was probably some mix of the Model Y changeover effect, people waiting for a new Model Y, and the political and brand damage. But is there a way of telling how much of each that is? Do we have any insights on how would we start to try to figure that out?
Well, I was looking at metrics. What I did see over the past few months is an increase in Tesla trade-ins. So more people are trading in Teslas for other vehicles than they have been at the past. So that means, you hear about people dumping their vehicles. It looks like we're starting to see a little bit of that. And the other thing that I think is pretty concerning as well is that when I look at our site traffic, people that shop other electric vehicles like the Chevy Blazer or the Honda Prologue, they're shopping Tesla models at a much lower rate than they were in the past. Before it was like, if you're looking at an EV, you're also looking at a Tesla. And that is not necessarily the case any longer, which could be, extremely damning for Tesla as they move forward in time and more EVs come on the market.
Hey, Jessica, this is Jay. I want to try to spin some positive out of that call because we are focused on all the negatives. Was there something that stuck out to you as new news or a positive spin that some analysts may come out tomorrow and focus in on besides the DOGE factor and the lack of certainty with tariffs?
Well, I mean, I think that he was very clear about some of the timelines for the robotaxi in Austin. It seems like he was like, this is happening. Of course, people were thinking, is it actually going to be one of those things that keep getting put off and put off and put off further down the road? It seems like that's clear because we're in April. It's almost May. That's literally next month. So not to make that timeline would seem not, in the best interest of Elon Musk at this time period. And the fact that he is talking about, he was not very specific about his DOGE step down, but at least he had said by next month, I should be able to focus a little bit more and maybe 1 to 2 days per week sounds like a lot to me. But it is not a 24/7 job anymore. And perhaps he can focus more on some of the core business of Tesla.
Jessica, asking about the robotaxi here, we've seen obviously Waymo operating in a number of cities. What's your sense of what the demand is for that kind of service and what the demand might be for a Tesla robotaxi service?
Mm-hmm. Well, there was a lot of just concern. Would people actually want to get into a taxi that no one is driving? And it seems like it is something that people are growing increasingly more comfortable with, especially in places where they see a lot of them. I'm in Los Angeles. It is very common to see them out on the road. It feels like people were very skeptical in the beginning, and now it is catching on. So it does seem like something that is going to pick up, in pace and demand. And I think people like this concept. They like the novelty. They're interested. They like to tell their friends. They like to talk about it. So I think from that vantage point, it is good. It's just that Tesla has to join this market. Waymo, like we had talked about, is far ahead of them at this point, and that is what people know. Tesla coming to market is they're late at this.
Jay, you want to?
Yeah, I just there's so many different things to talk about. But did you take anything away from China? He really didn't. When we were listening to the call, I know the call is still going on. To give us anything to say that the relationship is going to be good. He was concerned about it. That was one of the biggest questions investors had coming into this. What is your biggest concern about China going forward based on what we've heard so far on the call?
Yeah, I didn't hear a lot about that either. I think I wasn't listening at that portion. But I will say that's such a big concern moving forward for these battery electric makers. So much of the componentry, the mining, the cleaning of the minerals, all that, the processing, happens in China. So when there are roadblocks there, that's going to affect everything. And as these companies don't have access to those things or the prices increase, that is going to affect the market greatly. We're having an affordability crisis in the new vehicle market right now. Vehicles are expensive. They're getting more expensive because of the tariffs. Now they're getting more expensive because of these mineral costs or steel, aluminum, all of those things. We could get to a point where just there are so many people out of the market because they simply can't afford it. And it's not really a place that any automaker wants to go to, but it is a concern right now.
So Jessica, we've been focused so much on Tesla. I mean, I'm curious what other autos we have seen that have maybe picked up some of the slack from Tesla. I mean, we know there's not huge demand. It's not a booming market right now, but there is a market for new cars. So where are we seeing sort of more activity at the moment?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if we look at some of their competitors out there on the EV market, it is a weird market right now because we're in the situation where people are almost panic buying because of the tariffs. So what we see and what we've seen over the past few weeks won't necessarily be typical for the rest of the year. But we are seeing people trying to get these deals. They want to get these vehicles before the tariffs are on. They think that, when the time comes, all of a sudden vehicles are going to get a lot more expensive. But when we look at some of their competitors out there, Hyundai, Kia, Honda Prologue, General Motors products, they're all things that people are considering and could potentially really take away from some of Tesla's market share. I mean, we saw just a few weeks ago, California market share dropped below 50% of the EV market for the first time for Tesla. That's big. This is the nation's biggest EV market. So the fact that there is that door of opportunity for all of the automakers is important, especially some of the startups like Rivian and the new one, Slate.
Yeah, and then lastly, you talk about sales. Sales have been declining. He's obviously been blacklisted by certain communities here in the United States. Where do you see that growth coming from now? Because we haven't been able to see it in auto sales. He didn't give us anything really to hang our hat on. Going forward, the next 3 to 6 months, do you feel as if we're going to have to wait for another quarter before we can get anything truly optimistic out of Tesla?
I mean, they've talked a lot about the Model Y refresh. It feels like it's hitting at an unfortunate time for Tesla at this point in time. There's a lot of people that are, may not consider it as much as in the past. And, it seems like from all accounts, a fairly decent refresh. So it doesn't necessarily seem like people are clamoring to this product or Tesla in the short term. It just feels like they sort of need that next big thing to really kind of restir the love affair with Tesla, because it's like when you think about their last product that was more for the mass market, the Cybertruck, that was pretty polarizing. People loved it, but a lot of people did not like it. So until they kind of get to that next product that would be more appreciated by the mass market, they're still kind of stuck with what they have. Yeah. And, we've seen already from the first quarter, it doesn't seem to be hitting as much as it once did.
Well, and Jessica, the Cybertruck, it may be a mass product, but it's an expensive product, right? So the other thing, of course, that we're waiting for is the lower priced Tesla. And there's been some reporting around Musk said today they're on track, but there's been some reporting around whether indeed they are on track. There's been some reporting around whether it might just be a stripped down Model Y. Is that something that would be appealing in the market, or would it need to be sort of different enough from the existing Tesla models, even at that lower price point?
I think it needs to be different than the existing Tesla models. If you look at a stripped down Model Y, it doesn't feel like that would necessarily set the world on fire. I mean, if you want a cheap Tesla and that's what you're into, go get a slightly used one. The residual value hasn't been great on that vehicle. So if people are truly looking for that deal, it may be used by a few years, but you're going to get a great deal on it. So it does seem like there is something that has to be new, at least visually. I mean, people are they need to connect with their emotions, with their eyes. And even though, we may be attuned to all the small differences of a vehicle refresh, the average consumer isn't. They need to have a visible difference. And it feels like that's what Tesla really needs to kind of move the needle for themselves. And I don't think that's new news. It feels like that's been going on for a while when you think about how long in tooth the Model 3 and the Model Y are.
Gautam, I'm going to turn to you first on this because you have written about Elon Musk. You've talked about most recently this sort of mistaken belief that we have that if an executive is good at one thing, even very good, even genius at one thing, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be good at everything they put their hand to. But Musk didn't sort of pull back at all from the idea that what he's doing at Doge is good and right, and that it is a mission that he believes in.
Right. No, he didn't at all. And you wouldn't expect him to, given what we know about him.
Yeah.
I think the way in which Doge is harming him, even apart from the sort of first level effects of, oh, gee, it makes him really unpopular with the people who are most likely to buy electric cars, is people are watching Doge and seeing that it is not going well. Like his argument that he has done a huge amount of sort of eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse, it is just not true in the math. One of the things that I think the government might have been new to him is this is all public, and we can see that federal spending has not decreased. We can see that Doge has done many things that even the Trump administration has to immediately reverse after they realize the consequences. If much of Tesla's valuation is the halo of Elon Musk, Doge really dinged that halo.
And Jay, I want to bring you into this as well. I mean, even if, obviously investors wanted him to focus more on Tesla, but if he is still associated with Doge, can the brand damage be reversed?
Yeah, it's going to take some more time. I mean, he started off the call talking about how the protests have affected him and the company and how some of these were misguided. Some of them were, sponsored by outside forces. And then, when he got into Doge, you want to hear, he said it's critical work and he wants to continue to do this work, but he's going to get back, and there was no exact timetable. Yeah, next month in May. Yeah. Very casual, and 1 to 2 days a week. We want to hear a little more confidence as shareholders, as investors, that no, my time here is being well served, and now I need to focus back on what I'm doing with Tesla. And there was no real enthusiasm. He's not overly enthusiastic all the time, but he sounded tired. He sounded beaten down, and there was nothing timetable-wise that was concrete enough to watch the stock trade. I was watching the price after every comment. It peaked at 251. It slowly faded back. The stock is up more after hours because of that Jerome Powell news than what he had to say on this call.
That's a really interesting observation. Gautam, I want to focus in on something that Jay just mentioned, and that is Musk's comments at the top of the call, his allegations that he has presented without proof, that he has said before, that some of these protests against Tesla around the country are either people who are directly receive government largesse, who are upset that it's now going away, or who are directly paid by some dark forces. And I guess this is why most CEOs aren't out there tweeting, especially not, putting up conspiracy theories and whatnot, because it's not necessarily good for your business. So I'm curious what you make of. I mean, he led with that.
I think we can dismiss the accusations about them being paid if for no other reason than the protests are of such a scale that even Elon Musk could not afford to pay these protesters, right? So we could just toss that one aside. I think actually that if I were just judging him based on what he said on the call, if I were an investor just looking at the call, putting aside the track record at Tesla, putting aside his extraordinary what he's done at SpaceX, just listening to this CEO, I, as an investor, would say, no, really, I'd rather you stayed at Doge. I wouldn't want you to be back at Tesla. Because this is a guy who was saying things, as you said, with conspiracy theories that bordered on delusional, disconnected from reality in ways that aren't really, signs of great management. I wouldn't bet against Elon's ability to return to Tesla and become a great CEO, but this was not evidence that he is.
Well, and Gautam, if it gets to the idea of credibility, I mean, okay, let's leave aside the conspiracy theories for a moment. Elon Musk does not have a wonderful track record of meeting targets, especially not in a timely fashion, but some of them not even at all. And so when he says we'll be coming out with a lower cost car still by the end of the first half, or when he talks about potentially having autonomous driving being profitable by next year, or thousands of Optimus robots in Tesla's factories next year, how are we to take those comments?
Well, I mean, you put your finger on it, right? If anyone other than Elon Musk were saying that, people would not even take it seriously. Let's break it down a little bit, right? On autonomous driving, Tesla is not the leader. Waymo is. If you're talking about assisted driving, Tesla systems are not the leader. Mercedes probably is. If you're talking about Optimus, the robots he demonstrated weren't even autonomous. Like, I don't even know where Tesla is in the game of creating those kinds of robots. And the only line in their annual report that actually was good news, their power storage business, is the thing that is most vulnerable to Chinese pressure because they depend on Chinese lithium iron phosphate batteries. This is just a story where you have to believe this guy can work miracles, right? And then everything comes together. And if you don't believe that, this is not a story that makes any sense.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning Waymo. People forget that Waymo is active in 8 cities, at least in the U.S., and now going to Tokyo. And then I just wanted your take on him reiterating, by 2030, we will be the most valuable company in the world, possibly as big as the next 5 companies combined. I watched the stock do nothing as he said that. Last quarter he said that, and the stock did take off a little bit on that news. I just wondered your take on that.
I think you can only say things and not follow through on them so many times. And despite, right, I never take away from Elon what he did at SpaceX, right? What he did to get Tesla to where it is today. That's very real. But now what DOGE exposed over and over and over again was a person who made statements that were consistently in his own self-interest and had no ties to reality. That just doesn't lead you to confidence that he's going to get better in future.
We talked to Ross Gerber earlier, who bought into the stock on his behalf and on clients' behalf years ago, made a lot of money on it, and has been selling it off slowly. And he made the point today that Tesla is not the company that it was in terms of its growth profile. I guess if I'm an investor or a potential investor, what do I need to see at this point to show me that maybe that it is possible to get back to what Tesla was?
You need to see a Tesla board, and I don't believe you will see this, but you need to see a Tesla board that puts in people who are able to restrain Elon Musk's worst instincts and enhance his best ones. And so there is no such thing as the leader who operates at peak performance without constraints. That person does not exist. And Tesla has just allowed Elon to operate without constraints for an extended period of time, and the board is derelict in not stepping in and saying, no, whatever magic pixie dust you have been able to bring to the board, now you need other people around you who can tell you, hey, canceling the $25,000 EV, this is a really bad idea, and we're just not going to do that, as one example.
Yeah, and I was just curious your take when he talked about his relationship with the president. One of the things a lot of investors are out there, well, he's got the president's ear. He kind of backed down on his thought on tariffs. He treaded lightly on that subject. I just was curious what your take was. Did you expect him to be a little more combative, if you will, when it came to the tariffs on China?
I did not, partly because this is such a vulnerability for Tesla. But let me give you a movie quote that maybe, since Elon loves epic fantasy. There is only one Lord of the Ring, and he does not share power. Elon Musk is the wealthiest person in the world. He is the most powerful civilian in human history. But he is not the president of the United States. And the difference between the president of the United States and Elon Musk is vast. And I think he learned that the hard way when Trump rejected his advice on tariffs. That vulnerability that's been exposed is very real. And the idea that Trump is going to sort of find ways to channel money to Tesla of such an extent to justify the valuation that it has. We're not talking about like a few billion here and there. We're talking about tens or hundreds of billions of dollars. When the scrutiny on that is so enormous, when Musk has already demonstrated himself to be an enormous political liability in Wisconsin, it's kind of hard to see how that's going to happen.
Tesla getting several price target cuts following weaker than expected first quarter results. Automotive revenue down 20% year over year, while total net income was down 71% from a year earlier. Here with us now, we've got Stephen Gengaro, who is the Stifel Next Gen Transport Analyst. Good to have you here with us. You're bullish on Tesla, despite some of the warnings that we've heard from other analysts. How are you evaluating the company post earnings and what we heard from Musk on the call?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, and thanks for having me. So when we look at Tesla, and we've talked about this pretty often, is the near term is going to be bumpy, and we have seen the data. We actually have a group within Stifel that runs these really good surveys on favorability ratings, et cetera, and we've seen this sort of significant drop in net favorability rating towards Tesla, and that clearly was a headwind for sales in the quarter, along with some other things. I think people speak a little bit less about on social media, but the reality is they were rolling over production on their most important vehicle, the Model Y, throughout the quarter. So that had an impact as well. And the results effectively were weak, but I think they were expected to be weak. When we think about the company, we look, past the short term and really look at the story that's developing around full self-driving and robotaxi, and that's a huge part of the value creation for the company over time.
And I'm curious whether or not that forward-looking story that you talk about is still intact, given some of the branding challenges. Investor Ross Gerber spoke about those challenges with Yahoo Finance yesterday. Take a listen.
Tesla is fundamentally a different story than where it was several years ago. I mean, Tesla was a massive growth story. And now Tesla is a very mature EV maker with a CEO who doesn't work there. People just don't want their products, even though they're the best products in the market. So I don't know how they solve this. So I think Tesla's best days are behind it at this point.
Stephen, with that in mind, can you put the genie back in the bottle when it comes to Tesla's branding problem?
I think you can. It's one of the things we talked about in a recent report was we kind of look back at things like, the Bud Light, I don't want to call it scandal, but the Bud Light issues that they faced, the issues with Nike and Colin Kaepernick, the issues with Target for a short period of time when they had the whole transgender bathroom discussion. And, kind of these things are sort of these corporate positions which can impact the companies, they can impact sales for a short period of time. And I think that's why the news last night that sort of somewhat expected, but the fact that Elon has talked about taking a lot more time at Tesla and a lot less time maybe in the public eye as part of the government, I think was so well received. Now, the duration of sort of the impact of his involvement, clearly is hard to gauge and how that kind of plays out from a sales perspective. In the world of, X and social media, we kind of, we hear the barbells on most issues. And a lot of what we hear, clearly on Tesla has been negative from the far left and cars getting keys and vandalized, et cetera. But the reality is they still sold a lot of cars in the quarter. They mentioned on the call the order flow on the Y and the new Model Y has been very good. So I think this sort of does dissipate over time, but it remains a short-term headwind for sales.
It's interesting because you typically had and just acknowledging that we still don't have the firm reporting on exactly who was behind a lot of the vandalism and everything that you were mentioning a moment ago. So just want to be clear on that. But all that taking place does have a longer term type of mind share kind of, it sucks up a lot of the attention in the room away from what the company is trying to do at the end of the day. And so how long does it take for Tesla to regain that or put that at the top of the list for potential car buyers? Oh yeah, at a time where buying a lot of vehicles right now is perhaps very expensive for many people out there who are just trying to evaluate if they're going to be able to use a tax incentive, and they're not going to be able to, it sounds like, in the near future.
Yeah, but it's interesting. You obviously you have the macro, right, which is sort of the economy, the environment, the consumer, inflation, et cetera, interest rates, and then you have the maybe the micro on the company side. The reality is they have been affected, right, and we see it in the data. And one of the really intriguing things that we saw in some of the data that we have is that the willingness of Democrats versus Republicans to buy EVs is pretty significantly different. Part of it's geographic, right? Because the charging infrastructure is more on the coast, and range anxiety and charging is kind of a big part of buying an EV. But the other part of it is a bit political. And what we've seen actually pretty interesting over the last 6 months, maybe 4 to 6 months, is the Republicans' willingness to buy a Tesla and the favorability rating has risen sharply, and the Democrats has dropped significantly, right? So are there enough kind of Republicans buying Teslas that's going to offset that? Probably not. But I do think that, the impact of Elon's political involvement and the hatred we've seen online, et cetera, it will dissipate. Is it going to take a month? No. Is it going to take 2 years? That's probably not. So I think you'll start to see those buyers come back to the market. Yeah. I read something, I think yesterday, just about, Tesla sales in California were still extremely strong, right, in the month of March when the new Y came out, right? So I think it's overblown. It has an impact, but I think it's a bit overblown in the media.